could I bring them something back that I couldn't do the day before? And then try to learn from somebody. And it might be by reading an interesting book. Right now I'm reading about Cromwell and his time in England, Henry VIII. So I like to read books about people who have had interesting times, and sometimes their efforts have been terrible for mankind, and sometimes their efforts have been amazing for mankind. But if every day you're not learning from somebody about something, then you're sort of done. And I think if you really have intellectual curiosity and you want to remain relevant, you never can say I'm done.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I want to thank you again for joining, watching the show. I have an amazing guest today, Ken Nisch, and let me tell you, this is going to be a really, really interesting conversation. And selfishly, I'm excited for you all to hear it because it's based on something that he created, that he's been a part of, which is a creative entity in and of itself. So to me, being creative is just awesome, and creating things that other people can get value from is awesome. He's the chairman of JGA, been since 1995. And what they do is they create environments. They tell stories visually. And he'll tell you more about that. But they work with some of the biggest names, biggest brands in the world, names that you would recognize. And in fact, let me just run through a couple right here. Let's see. We have Dell, we have Converse, we have Foot Locker, Godiva. I'm pretty sure I saw Hershey on here. Yeah, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So long intro, but Ken, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad to have the conversation.
Well, I had the honor of doing something I've never done before, and that was speaking with you for a half hour about me before we started the show. So I appreciate you asking me some questions and listening to me. But what I got from that was, I think I'm about to hear that we may have a lot of similar beliefs, just maybe some similar overlapping beliefs about how things happen and how you recognize opportunities. But before we get to where you are today, who you are today, and everything you've achieved, could you do us all a favor, just bring us back to the beginning and tell us kind of how it started for you, maybe even as a kid? Would you mind doing that?
No, I'd be happy to.
Awesome. Let's start there.
I have to say, my upbringing and my life as a child was probably pretty ordinary and pretty typical. And I don't have a story of overcoming adversity or lightning striking or having some extraordinary talent. But from that, frankly, I think the path to where I am is a little serendipity and a little luck and a little opportunity that really sort of built one piece on top of the other. But as I moved through my education, I found that I liked people. I liked to listen to people. I found it kind of exciting that sometimes people like to listen to me. And I have things like my class president and student body president and types of leadership roles where I felt you had responsibility to listen, and then you had responsibility to do something with what you heard. But in terms of where that was going to lead, I was good in art. I did well in school, and I sort of started looking down the list when somebody said, "Well, you got to do something." And I started with the A's in the alphabet, whether that was attorney or analyst, and I got to architect, and I kind of joke I never got out of the A's in terms of what I might do next. And it led me to being accepted into architectural school at the University of Cincinnati that had a great program. My intention was to maybe go to law after I went to architecture, still stuck on the A's as an attorney. But I found out I enjoyed this big canvas platform of creativity and environment and design. Took a lot of psychology classes, took business classes, and all of a sudden I kind of walked out of there saying, you really could create a business around creativity. And I think in many cases, people in creative businesses look down on the business part of the creativity. They see it as really a liability. It's what I have to do to get to do the other part. And I kind of thrived on the really bringing them together. And one of the things that University of Cincinnati had then, which was really quite different, they had what they called a co-op program. And for 6 months out of the year, when you were in architectural school, you actually worked in an environment. And it might be for a traditional architect, it might be for a company. My roommates worked for people like, Buckminster Fuller, and ended up working in doing an internship at the London School of Economics. And one of them was designing a parking garage now. Another one ran the facilities program for NASA. So the idea of co-op was it sort of helped you find the place where you might want to do the thing you want to do, which was a really gift. And I had the opportunity to work with a group then called Federated Department Stores,
Sure.
which were Bloomingdale's and A&S and Burdines and Rich's and
Macy's too, right?
Excuse me?
Isn't Macy's part of that?
Well, Macy's became part of it at a later date, or it became part of Macy's, depending on who tells the story.
Right.
But at that point, Macy's was a department store, but it wasn't necessarily one that people would say was, led the way. Bloomingdale's was the one everybody would talk about, or Burdines they would talk about. And so it was a time when retail was really driven by department stores. I was talked about the guys that run them were all out of central casting with good hair and, good suits and
right.
And people who graduated from Harvard and Yale and places like that went to work for places like Bloomingdale's and Burdines. So one of my co-op opportunities was working at Federated. A gentleman who was the vice chairman there was always very generous with young people and attention and asking them questions and bringing them along places that they didn't necessarily have a seat at the table, but he gave them a seat at the table. And he showed me this big, exciting world. I'd never been on an airplane before I co-opted at Federated. And all of a sudden, I said, let's run down to Burdines and see what they're doing, or let's go to New York. And all of a sudden, this very typical, ordinary life, went from being, sort of black and white to color, because people exposed me to a world that I really hadn't seen before. And that sort of built the platform for what I do today.
So you kind of, it sounds like you jokingly were like looking through a phone book and you went through the A's and you kind of landed on something, but you didn't, because the things that you ended up doing and the path you chose, they were all based on your creativity and a combination of the things that you liked and maybe had a passion for, like architecture like it made sense. It all actually played right into it, and it just made perfect sense, although you didn't know it at the time.
Right. I didn't, because I think of the sort of crossroads of history, writing, architecture, they were all visual arts, but typically they were seen as as skills, not really sort of integrated and put together around something that could actually be, that could be bought or that was seen as having value other than for the artifacts that were produced. And retail was kind of this interesting platform because of fashion and innovation and new products and technology and all the things that were happening. It became really this really crossroads of commerce and art in its heyday. Whether that still exists today is probably, you could argue. But at that point, the cool people, the Marvin Traubs and the Fred Lazaruses, the people that were personalities, and really they were the most important people in the communities. They supported the arts. They created social inclusion at a time when the world didn't do that. You had to be conventional to succeed. And the department store business said, "Hey, come, everybody, come, whether you're a designer or an artist or a creator." And we're the sort of big tent that everybody is invited into. So it was like a very welcoming place where the expectations were high, but the freedoms were immense.
At that point, it sounds like something very cool was happening, which was, as you pointed out, there's this sort of combination of commerce and art, and there's a mindset, and you, I mean, you couldn't have planned it this way, but you got into this space at like just the right time, because those are the things that you really wanted. And actually, I'm looking at your face while you're talking. You seem like you're really passionate about it, and like you love that combination right there.
Yeah, it was, the combination, because, think of that time, it's when, Bloomingdale's once a year would turn into England or India or Brazil. And, the world is so, obviously with the internet and with social media and with media in general, I mean, the world's a much smaller, flatter place than it was when I started doing this, which was really in 1978, 79. And so a kid that was sort of exposed to very little, all of a sudden got exposed to this really big world that was about exposing the world to even a bigger world. And through the generosity of mentors and people that really wanted to create opportunities, that brought me into this.
You read my mind. My next question. Oh, that's perfect. I've heard you mention names. I've heard you mention people. And what I'm taking from that is, and you alluded to it, there are people along the way. This is so important to anybody that ever watches this. I haven't met anybody who's been successful in business who hasn't had some sort of mentoring, and usually a series of different mentors at different stages that help you evolve. And sounds like that was part of your evolution.
It very much was so. And what's interesting about it, I always thought my job then was going to be working there after I finished my education. But the gentleman who was probably the most important mentor gave me some advice. He said, "Don't come here now, come here later. Because you're a good student of what we do, but what we need is people who bring ideas from outside of what we know and do. And you can always come back here whenever you want a job, but I'm not gonna hire you, or I'm not gonna ask somebody to hire you. I'm gonna tell you to go get experiences somewhere else. So when you come back, you bring something back that we haven't thought about, rather than just knowing what we thought about." So it was a great advice. So I had done a couple of projects when I was in college. One of them won a design award for one of the trade magazines. So all of a sudden I had a little bit of a reputation. So when I went out to look sort of my first job, I had a few people that were interested. And my dad, who gave me 2 points of advice, he said, "You're never going to be successful in the corporate world. You're just not sort of wired that way." He was a financial controller for a large manufacturing company. He said, "Find somebody who will teach you skills that you don't have." And somebody who is more entrepreneurial, then maybe you're going to find an opportunity in the corporate world. You can always go back to the corporate world with that, but think of this as sort of your second education. I didn't go and get an MBA or business education. He said, "Find somebody who will teach you something you don't know." So I had the opportunity to work with the company that I have been with literally since I've been out of school. And I joke around, I've had 500 jobs in one parking space, because in the role we are, in the morning I'm talking to somebody about cannabis, and in the afternoon it's creating a religious gift store in Mecca, which I'll never be able to visit. But and that all happens, and it's a concierge-based pet care company, and it might be redoing 3 million square foot of space in Dubai, and that can be the day. So lots of great jobs.
So two of the people that you just referenced, one of them said, "Come back and bring ideas, go out into the world and get experience so that you can come back with a perspective." Mm-hmm. And the other one, I think it might have been your dad, to connect with people who can teach you new skills. That's like very specific advice. And it's really interesting that like you're telling it to me, I don't know how many years, I guess decades later.
Yes.
That it's still like you're carrying that. Like, that's great advice. Have you passed on advice to other people who like where you've been a mentor and it's actually had an impact on them?
Yeah, I've tried to, through times I've been associated in, at various opportunities to teach in design schools, as an adjunct, with people within my own organization. I many times have said to people, it's time for you to do something else, not because, I'm firing you, but because I don't want to be a barrier to optimizing what you can do. And
Wow.
sometimes it may be going back to school. Sometimes it may be, working in another environment, or sometimes maybe just a different job. Over the years, I think one of the things it's a gift that you can give people is give them permission to take risks, to trust themselves, to get out there and do something differently. But I think to your question is, I try to take those two bits of advice in every day. Basically ask myself, am I doing those two things? Am I getting outside of what I know? So either for myself or for the people I work with, could I bring them something back that I couldn't do the day before? And then try to learn from somebody. And it might be by reading an interesting book. Right now I'm reading about Cromwell and his time in England, Henry VIII. So I like to read books about people who have had interesting times, and sometimes their efforts have been terrible for mankind, and sometimes their efforts have been amazing for mankind. But if every day you're not learning from somebody about something, then you're sort of done. And I think if you really have intellectual curiosity and you want to remain relevant, you never can say I'm done. You're always a work in process.
I can't write as fast as you're talking. I mean, you just hit on like 5 amazing things. I want to just, so to your point about curiosity, the value in curiosity, even before we began shooting this episode, I said to you, I have a few questions written down, but this is it's a conversation that flows. For me, it flows from curiosity. Once you and I start talking, I'm so curious about so many things, and there's not enough time for us to even go through them all. But I can tell you that out of all the people, I've had so many people on the show already, and many of them are CEOs, leaders in some respect. There's a common thread. They're all always seeking to learn more. It's a hunger for knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
There's not complacency, right? So there's this, you want momentum. You kind of want to keep moving forward. You could be complacent. I probably, if you chose to, I could, if I chose to, but
Yep.
we aren't wired that way. It's not that at all. So that's a valuable lesson for anybody out there who may not naturally be that way. It is a good place to try and steer yourself towards, to be curious, to read, to want to consistently learn. And and I'm not talking about, to your point about going to school learning, it's life lessons. It's one of the things actually this morning I did a performance review with one of my employees, and we spent very little time talking about the technical side of things because I'm in the IT business. We spent 80% of the time discussing how we can work on his critical thinking skills and his emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew he would be receptive to that. And I also know that if I can lead him to the water, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was following my lead on it. I saw his light bulb go on. And I said to him, I said, you could be with us 10 years from now. You could be with somebody else. But what we're talking about is valuable no matter where you are. And we should work on your emotional intelligence and critical thinking, because that's one of the most valuable things I can teach you.
Right.
And
because you can teach people skills, and I think sometimes people come with talents, but then that sort of finding that place where talents and skills really come to life. This is around, I think, curiosity, and sometimes it's not a linear process. Probably the best times it's not a linear process, but if you don't have enough exposure to the unknown. Our business, we had a nice business in the U.S. for a long time. And about 10 years ago, I said, just to keep the environment challenging stimulus, I said, we're going to make a big jump to international business. And we did a little research, a little thought process, and identified Central America and particularly Brazil and East Asia, and particularly India, as places that we felt that were very poised to leverage our skills and our talents, but also in places where we could learn a lot And frankly, it's places where our clients are probably thinking of as new markets. So we have to be ahead of where our clients are, and where where they see their growth. And we can't just be sort of parachuting ideas into places that we really don't know about. But the benefit is when you look at things through different people's eyes, you start to see the things you thought you knew differently as well. And so I think sometimes you have to sort of, I tell my kids, you got to stand in the road once in a while. And sometimes I think as you go through your career, you have to take these risks and stand in the road and be willing to sort of get hit. You want to plan, but we all know every plan is subject to change. But
at any time, all the time.
Yes.
So one of the reasons that we start this way, and we're almost a half hour in, is to get to know you, right? So we don't want to start at where you're at today, but we want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you for giving us a background, and we get a sense of who you are and how you think, and I mean, you come across in a very, very humble way, which is great. And the information you're sharing is actually priceless. I mean, everything you're saying is, I'm actually feeling like I'm being mentored listening to you. I mean it. This is such, and the way you said some of these, I've never heard anybody say the intersection of talent and curiosity. Like, I wrote that down. It's brilliant. That's a book right there. The intersection of talent and curiosity. Like, what is that? It's like the same thing we talked about before. Luck is a combination of opportunity and preparedness.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So those are the ingredients,
No, I mean, just to build on a little bit, I co-authored a book that was published in September around sustainability. And, it's something I have an interest in. There's a technical side of it. But I said, I think we need to go out and really look at, sort of broaden the conversation. So Vilma Bauer, who was my co-author, who was an industry writer, we interviewed roughly 150 brands and retailers and financial companies and thought leaders around the globe about what sustainability means to them. And
really,
and ultimately the conversation brought a broadening idea, because for many people it's about carbon and recyclability, but the whole area of social and cultural sustainability, cultural being the challenges of globalism and the impact it's having in actually endangering the uniqueness and expression that exists in the world and making it sort of one big mass element. And then the social part of it is just what is the human impact of things like consumption and manufacturing, good and bad. And then really looking at how different companies, whether it be Selfridges in London or a interesting company called Bagot in India, where the founder is an entrepreneur and she's a Jain, and they have, philosophically, they don't believe things should create pain. It shouldn't create pain to the earth, to people, to animals, and has built her whole business around taking as much pain as she can out of the process of creating things for people. And it sort of changed the whole conversation around what is sustainability. So the book really wasn't about creating an answer. It was about creating questions and perspective, and really bringing all these different people together.
And that book is out. That book was published.
Yes.
So when
I'll
we get
send
to
you
the
a
end of
copy.
the
I should have
show,
sent one before our conversation.
that's great. And when we get to the end of the show, and this is all, it's all published, but we'll put the link. If you have a link to where people can buy it, we'll put that in the description. Yep. That's a really interesting, unique perspective on that topic. Like I've never heard that perspective before, so I think I want to read the book.
But I think it's an example of sort of organized curiosity, because what really prompted the idea was the curiosity about, are we really thinking about this topic in a holistic way? And then there's the disorganized curiosity we all have, that we're breaking up in the middle of the night and writing something on the pad next to the bed, or seeing something on the way to work, or hearing our grandchildren ask a question. But I think if you're not open to the incoming traffic, you're really you're going to lose a lot on the outgoing traffic on what you try to do.
And you mean by open to the incoming traffic, you mean the ideas that come into your head, the things that flow into you?
Yeah, the information, the stimulus, I'm in a visual business, and we all know how we remember so many things. As visual learners, we remember so much more by visual cues, and so when you're in this business, you're sometimes it's really hard to turn off the inbound stimulus, and then you have to figure out which things are really lead you to the next place, to the next place, the next place.
Over the years, as I've done personal work on myself, and I began to do things. I'm going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but this is an interesting topic. For many, many years, I would wake up every morning and I would meditate in the morning, 5, 10, sometimes a half hour. And even though your mind is supposed to be clear, sometimes some of the best, clearest ideas would come to me during that time, or right after. And just from other people and things I've studied, it became apparent to me, which is kind of obvious, when you're in a constant, or if you're in a state of stress or worry or fear, or a lot of those places where people vibrate that aren't necessarily creative, that you're not very creative. However, being able to get myself into a state in general, like not just for a half hour, but of being, that allowed my mind to be open to let the ideas flow in. I had to find a way to ultimately be a happier person that was more in a joyful mindset, half glass full, rather than those states of mind. Ideas flow because I'm not blocked by anything negative or worry or stress. And
right,
it turned out to be true over time. And now I share that with people that work with me, and when they're open to that type of maybe next level thinking, there is always that commonality, like the people that I find that are most creative don't carry that type of negative energy with them. So that more things find them. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. And more good comes in.
Right.
And just this wall behind me here is photographs of ceilings in places I've been all over the world. And one of the things I think is quite different for some reason, ceilings seem to be more unique around the world than floors. I can't tell you why. And whether it's everything from the light bulbs to the HVAC diffusers to the ceiling of a church or a mosque, or a castle. And so I said, every place I go, I'm going to take pictures of ceilings, and just as a sort of a path to look at things intentionally and differently. And these are just some of my favorites here, but some of them are quite subtle, and some are quite magnificent. But to me, that's sometimes you have to find a jumping off point for your curiosity. And this is a rather silly one, but it was a place to sort of channel that and to organize that.
What's also interesting about ceilings, the fact that some things that you find in one that's special, clearly it tells you that somebody put the time into that creativity, because it's a ceiling.
And in most cases, unlike floors and walls, it doesn't have to, it's not driven by function.
Right.
It's usually driven by expression.
That's right.
And then for whatever reason, they seem to last a lot longer than. So sometimes the stories that they tell are stories that have long gone away in other parts of the physical environment.
I'm going to shift
another
us
rabbit hole.
No, that was. I mean, you and I probably could talk about that forever. Let me shift us. So take me through some of the different things you've done. And if you said this earlier on, I forgive me. But the company you've been there for a long time, as you said, and you've done a lot of different
40
things.
years. So
you've done probably everything in that company. You understand the inner workings of every single thing in the company, obviously. So tell me about that journey for yourself. Like, how did you move through each piece of each role in that company? How were you recognized? Like, how did people see that you had something special? Or did it happen that way? You were recognized as somebody special and groomed to kind of move through the company?
It's funny. The husband and wife started this company literally in their basement. And the gentleman was an engineer and came out of the Second World War and was involved in the invention of the moving checkout belt in stores.
Really?
And it was
Interesting.
for a refrigeration company that was in upstate New York. And this is when people had problems getting customers out of stores, not getting people into stores. You think of, sort of the 40s, 50s boomtown economy. Grocery stores were 3 aisles, and they went to 7 aisles and 11 aisles, and now we know what we have today in the grocery environment. But he always felt that there should be a bit of science and a bit of art. His wife was actually a dressmaker and an interior designer, and so he kind of put that left brain and right brain together. And just human side of the story, he had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Oh, wow. Moved his family back to Detroit, where our business is, basically because his wife's family was here and was prepared to die, and created a business so his wife would have income. Well, that was when he was probably in his late 30s. He passed away at 89 years old. So the doctors were wrong. But he always felt that there was this combination of art and science. His wife was the art. I joined the business, and it was a local business, primarily working with paint stores and office supply stores. When every town had a local stationery store, it had a local paint store. Malls were built. My first store I did in college was actually in a regional shopping center that was in the middle of a cornfield, in 1977, I guess it would have been. And he saw that mixture of art and science, I think, before most companies saw that. And he saw the store that I did in the shopping center, and started to recruit me out of college and say, you should come work for me. I had a couple other offers. And we talked a little bit earlier. My dad said, you should go work for the person that can teach you what you don't know. And I went to a conventional architecture school, design school, never went to business school, but always felt that maybe my future was to have a business or to be in business. Even though that's not how I was brought up. I'm very jealous of the people that had kitchen table MBAs because their parents were entrepreneurs or had a business, and they stood behind the counter on Saturdays. I didn't have that gift. Yeah. And so joined the company, and he was somebody who gave people chances to fail, and did that with me, and sort of a young and starry-eyed person going out to talk to a lot of really seasoned local and regional retailers, which at some point became people like Les Wexner, who started the Limited and Abercrombie and Victoria's Secret. And so I kind of joke around. I went to Client University, and got exposed to some very great, generous people who taught me a lot of things about things I didn't know. So I think long story. To answer your question is that sort of this path was some of it was opportunity, some of it was luck, and some of it was listening, and then listening in the morning and trying to apply it in the afternoon. And he saw that, and I purchased the company with a partner at the time, and we had an ESOP in the late 80s.
How old were you at that time?
So let's see, in the 80s, I would have probably been in my late 20s, I guess, at this point.
You purchased the company in your 20s?
Yes. And tell you how good I am in being planning is, I think 3 weeks later, the stock market crashed. After we signed the deal and put up my house and my life and my kids basically, and started a business in still the biggest one-day crash in the stock market's history, knowing that I had to somehow make this work, and having taken this risk.
So that was actually another unbelievable opportunity. First of all, you had to burn the boats. Have you heard that expression?
Yes.
You were all in. There was nowhere else to go. There was no plan B. So that's good. And then you got faced with an amazing challenge. Obviously, it worked out. And so that's more of that life experience. That's the education.
Yeah,
How did you get
and
through
a
that? What'd you
challenge,
do?
and sort of add to the challenge a little bit is the folks that weren't offered the opportunity to buy the company were not too happy. So I literally started this with myself and another partner and a few other uh, uh, colleagues that were not too happy this was not going to be their company. So we
At that time, was how important was it that you had the shared set of core values and beliefs? That a big part of you guys sticking together and getting through that?
it was with the people that stuck, and a few people didn't. But the all these things, they open the door to new talent and new solutions. One of the things that the gentleman, John Greenberg, who sold the company, did, he was retired. He said, I'm going to come back and talk to everybody and tell them they should at least give you a chance. And he was a very generous person in doing that, because a lot of people could have said, hey, I'm done with this. He didn't come back into the business, and he didn't do the work, but he said, you know what, you should do yourself a favor, and you should give these new guys a chance before you think do something else.
So he believed in you. He knew what you guys
Yeah.
were capable of, stood behind you, and you guys were able to stick together, rally, do the work. And you must have had perseverance, and you guys must have had some pretty serious work ethic to get through those times. You clearly, I wouldn't say turned it around. I don't know how good or bad things were, but you got things to the point where, I mean, you have a substantial company. I mean, today.
Yeah, and really, I think to a lot of people's credit, other people rallied with it, because that was a challenging time. They seem to run every 10 years. We seem to blow up.
Right.
uh,
Right.
and retail's a bit of a cyclical business, and so you sort of have to build that into it, and sort of work around those cycles, because it is a reality. But we've always had a kind of a promise here, is that you don't have to worry about your job, and we shouldn't worry about you doing your job. And so, unlike most companies, we've never had that sort of layoff ad. We've kept a core group of people through all these years. Our biggest challenge
Awesome.
over the last few years are people retiring. Because one of the things I think, if I look back and say, did I make a mistake, was that I felt there was a right size for this company in terms of the number of people, and kind of said it's never going to be more than 50 people. Because there are all sorts of things you had to do and step up as you move beyond that number. But our turnover problem is we never had any turnover. So a lot of us grew up and aged together in the company, in the leadership. Probably didn't necessarily mentor or nurture always the younger talent, which we did, and people have built new careers. But all of a sudden, too many people in the company were the same age, at the same level, and really had to sort of rethink and reinvent as part of that process. So you always look back, what would you have done differently? Probably found a way to create a path, and a path for retention, growth and retention, for some of the great talent that's moved through this company that maybe didn't stay with the company, because we had a little bit of a glass ceiling with the lack of turnover.
One, the last question I say for the end, I'm gonna throw in there now, because the timing is good, and the age works out perfect. So what you just gave me, would that be the same thing that you would recommend to the 25-year-old version of yourself? If you can go back and give some advice, and I guess at that point you would have been buying the company, but what would the advice be that you would give to yourself at 25, knowing what you know now?
I think I would have probably, at some point when you're doing, building, growing, the runway that you lay out, you don't think far enough ahead. If you're sometimes an entrepreneur, your runway is your bank statement at the end of the month. And then it's, what can you do in the quarter? What's the year look like? And, how long is this lease? Because those are all things that you can kind of see in front of you. But what you don't know is what's on this side. And I think probably spending a little more time having a plan sort of past those things that measure you from the outside, and a little more of a plan on measuring and understanding those things that don't have that aren't applied from the outside.
So like more time spent like projecting they're unknowns, but they're also things you can kind of see what might happen. Like
yes.
if you look far enough down the road and have some sort of plans, that's brilliant. I mean, that's brilliant advice, and it's true. I mean, I know so many entrepreneurs I know don't do that.
Right.
And then they're surprised when they get to a certain point, and then, well, you could have seen that coming 2 years ago.
Right.
If you would have just
and to try to think of things that and like all plans, that have to be subject to change and adjustment. But
exactly,
what is the 5-year vision, the 10-year vision, the 15-year vision? And when you're a 20-year-old or 30-year-old, the idea of something 15 years from now is so abstract. And yet, when you think of a design business, its assets are really the people and the reputation. And the reputation part you can manage, but the people part is much more challenging. That's the toughest part of a service business, as you well know.
Yeah. So not if this isn't a financial question, it's more of a growth question, but from where you were when you bought the company to where you guys are today, and I know you mentioned you had maybe just done a deal with a larger company, but how would you describe the growth? I mean, 5 times, 10 times, like what did you take what you had from during a economic downturn to what the company is today? And I have 3 other questions related to your answer.
So I think one of the things I learned at some point is how big you are and how many dollars that you have in terms of the top line are much less important than how productive you are and how many dollars that you have on the bottom line. Because it's much easier to get big than it is to get to be successful. And it's big is a roller, and successful is a paintbrush. And and so I think the so much of what's measured in our industry is who are the top 10 companies based on volume. But I think what we found out is that there were too many compromises on who you do business with and how you do business. And we really said, let's try to have the 10 best clients, not the 10 biggest clients. Let's find the people that want a longer relationship and really sees our work as building value, not just completing tasks.
Right. So you've brought on clients that have shared values.
Correct.
And so it's a good client relationship. And over the decades, that's grown and grown and grown, which one of the reasons I'm asking is because as a business owner, one of the things that's important to me is continuing, to not stand still, because I believe standing still is contraction, right? Because you're going to lose clients here and there. So we're consistently moving forward, but I look at it, I have team members who have families. And when you look at the amount of people that rely on the organization for health insurance, for to put food on the table, to pay mortgages, I as an owner, I feel a sense of obligation to the people that work in my organization to continue to grow the company so that we don't contract, especially as we're going into a potentially very tough time. So I was curious, like the reason I asked you that question was what secrets or what keys might there be to people that have businesses that do need to continue growing them, And especially during tough times, like how do you do that? Like how do you not become a commodity, and how do you not just get stagnant?
Yeah, I think growth is an interesting measurement. And so if you look at growth and you said, well, we just have to, but this is, I think was mentioned earlier, bigger is not necessarily the virtuous measurement of growth. To me, it's much more around stability and predictability and continuity. And so places where measurements that take into account, I'd say, the human ecology as well as the financial ecology. So, in terms of what you're doing, how does it affect the people's lives that you work with, and the people and the institutions and other people that depend on you, and frankly your own sanity, and finding out what's the right size for you, and then how to manage that size to the optimal metrics, whatever your metrics are, and then figure out how to create a plan for that within a horizon that makes sense for who you are and what your goals are. Because you can have very different horizons, if you see this as a 10-year effort or a, 40-year effort. I don't know what 20-year-old thinks of something that they might do for 40 years. I have to say I didn't.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I wish I maybe had more milestones along the way to think about that, or should have. But how can you think about something 40 years ahead when you haven't even lived 40 years? And yet, if you're really going to have a successful business, you really have to think about that horizon much more broadly than I think most people do. I think a lot of people are surprised by where they got to or what their success is,
Right.
or
they're just driven by ambition and hard work. They're driving, but then you stop to say, "Oh my God, look what I have. Look
right.
what we have. Look, how'd that happen? 10 years just went by. 20 years just went by."
Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing though, and like I'm taking this in personally. I feel like I'm getting a coaching session as we're speaking. There, you have you must have good processes in place. Like there's good, because when you talk about metrics, quarterly metrics and bottom lines, and the business has to have process, and there has to be accountability, and so you must have a lot of that in place because you have consistently, predictably been fairly stable. And these are the words
Right.
I'm
Particularly
like.
in an industry that tends not to be. It tends to
Right.
be,
Is it
a
the
shining
process?
moment. Yeah, I think there's certainly technical processes in terms of how you run the metric or the mechanics of the business. But I think it's really been more of a kind of a simple set of values that there's a huge amount of freedom, and with that becomes a great level of expectations. And people who thrive in this environment are willing to take on the expectations in order to be given the freedom to be creative and to do unique things. And that's what builds continuity, is some sort of balance between those two elements. Because if you just have freedom, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And if you just have expectations, there will be a kind of person that has comfort in that environment, but it's probably not the right person for a business like ours, a creative business, particularly where the clients are looking to be sort of surprised and delighted all the time, and yet they want the trains to run on time. So
You just described like a perfect, if you could see what I wrote, values, arrow, expectations, arrow to thrive, arrow to continuity to success.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the roadmap. I just heard you. That's what I wrote. And it's a roadmap starting with values.
And I think on there's cycles where you probably do some of these things better than you do others. And there's cycles where you as a group, you probably value, you may value the continuity in challenging times, and you enjoy the creativity during easier times, but you can't lose sight of either. regardless of what the outside world is, sort of bringing to your front door.
Hang on, I had a question. I jotted down while you were talking before. I didn't want to interrupt you. Okay, so we've talked in like a variety of different ways, and I think we're gonna wind it down after this question. But at the end of the day, it is all about the client, right?
Yes.
So to have that stability and predictability, people are going to come and go, but for the most part, you've got those clients where there's shared values. It's not a typical vendor relationship. It's more of a strategic partnership that's guided by the outcomes of what they want, your ability, and in my case, the same thing, the ability to deliver, and that can become a very, very long relationship.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, that relationship has to constantly be nurtured. It's not always about the work. It's about how they feel during the process, right?
Right.
Have you found that that's been also part of the key to success, that maintaining that feeling? That's not like we're selling people, because people are always on the defensive about they're being sold on something, and breaking through that barrier is, no, we're not selling you something. We're here to provide a service. We have shared values, and now we really have a good, solid, meaningful human relationship here.
Yeah, and I think in most cases your clients really are not companies; they're people, because people change companies sometimes very often, and having those shared values and that the transparency and the trust, carries with the person to the company that the person works for, and part of that is, I think, sort of wrapping that in a little bit of humility. I think you mentioned we became part of IPG as of September 1, and particularly working with the Chase Design Group within sort of the Future brand umbrella. And one of the core values of that company is humility. And as I looked for who our right partners would be going forward, to address some things like research and technology that takes sort of a big tent to really deliver effectively, and more opportunities and challenges internationally. I went through a process and identified 10 different companies that I aspired to and felt that they were a match with our culture and our values, and went through a process for about a year, narrowing it down to 2 companies, and then really going through a more diligence process. But one of the things that stood out was humility being a core value. I can't say that to claim that we institutionalized that or maybe identified that, but it was one of those moments where the light bulb goes on. It says, well, if you want to be part of a group of people, humility is a pretty important a core value, because that not only is a good fit for us, but it also is a really good fit for the people we work with, who are sometimes very powerful and influential people, but they often got there as well because they practiced that humility. They were good listeners. They gave people a chance. They didn't always have the answer. Sometimes they spoke last, not first. And those are the kind of people I think we work with best, and I think who felt that we were good partners.
It's kind of the opposite of ego.
Yes, yeah,
right.
It's sort of that. I'm not a new age Zen person that's sort of surrendering the ego. I'm sure there's a pose or a chant that takes you there, but.
This is my last question. I kind of bring it full circle. You purchased the company during a downturn. What year was that?
It was 88, I think. It was October, November of 88.
That was that major crash. Like everybody.
Right. Okay. Biggest percentage crash, more so than the whole 2007 crash was, as a percentage of decrease.
Now we're going into 2023 in a few months. And it seems like we're on track to have some problems. Right? Everybody would agree there's problems in the economy. Are you foreseeing another one of those, like, okay, another 10-year block where we got to reinvent ourselves, or is that really at this point, because of deals you've done and maybe because of the brand you've developed, that you're more stable now, even going into a downturn?
If you think about it, it was 88, 2001, 2007. There's always going to be a cycle of these downturns, and we have been probably affected less than, because generally in trying to find the right clients and the clients finding us is, I think, no matter what happens in the broader economy, there's the people who embrace quality always do better, and they also find opportunity in those times. And it's the people that don't that are on the edge of that, or are the ones that probably are affected the most from the standpoint of who we do business with. So I hope that there's not a economic challenge or a recession. Ultimately, it will probably impact us less, and in some ways we may find opportunities that we really hadn't thought about before.
I'm so glad that's how you feel about it. I look at it the same way, so I'm glad, because it's validating partially, but it's also good to hear that somebody who's far more experienced than I have is kind of seeing it the same way. And it is, if you have quality relationships and service, and I see this as an opportunity, unfortunately for others, but fortunately for those of us that have those quality brands, to really help people that maybe it could be a good time for them to make a change. Maybe they're considering a change. This is a great time to lean into it. I'm leaning into it. I'm like increasing my marketing, increasing everything. I'm leaning into it. While my CFO turns to me, he's like, "Are you sure you want to spend that much on paid ads?" I'm like, "Yeah, I want people to know we're here."
Well, it's also sometimes a great opportunity to connect with people who are great contributors to the company. That maybe I've had the opportunity to serve on various boards, public company, private equity boards, and from seeing it sort of from the inside of an operator, is there's never really a bad time. There's just missed opportunities, and even in times that people would say were bad, sometimes the opportunities you have to be a little more less linear to find those opportunities, but there are opportunities. So I remain an optimist. I don't know quite how one could get up in the morning if they weren't.
I hear you. You're just so much good stuff here. I can't keep up with the notes. We broke the record for the most amount of pages of notes I've ever taken during a show. I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. I know what you've done and the sort of the who you are part from the research I've done and the mutual friends that we have, but you've honestly exceeded my expectations. Like this conversation to me is one of the conversations that I would watch, on a YouTube podcast, because you delivered actually a lot of value. I mean, the advice you gave on this episode was like, this is nonstop. It's gold nugget after gold nugget. And I really appreciate it. And I hope that anybody that ever watches it, whether it's next week or 2 years from now or 10 years from now, that they get the same thing that I got out of talking with you. This has been like a really valuable experience for me. So thank you.
One of the things I maybe leave you with two things. One is I have children that are grown children with grandchildren, and they always used to tell me, you could have really done something with your life. And they because on one hand with with what I've done in my life, I haven't cured anybody or built something for the generations. A lot of what I do is intentionally obsolete. But I think ultimately you have to say, well, going back to what are the metrics of, quote, having done something? Have you influenced people in a good way? Have you somehow done the best you could do? I think one of the things we often only measure success in sort of the top 1% of everything that happened. But there's an awful lot of places, I think, where you can look back and say you were successful. This was successful, but not necessarily in just those most conventional measurements. And then I think the second thing, I think you should do one of these podcasts yourself and let some of the people you've interview you, and and be put in the same chair and answer some of the same questions. So I think that I know I would enjoy seeing that.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, good. Well, you put together a few folks. I'm when you were mentioning earlier an MFA fighter and a Hollywood producer and a couple other folks. I think would be interesting. Yeah. Looking from their perspective on asking you those same questions.
I've had I could bring on I've had a guy who's built and sold 2 hedge funds, large ones. I've had the UFC MMA fighter. I mean, I've had many people who have started businesses. It's been interesting, but I appreciate that. That's my story is interesting, but maybe one day, maybe I'll put it out there one day.
You put it on your list. Maybe that's your how you said 100. Maybe that's your
100th episode.
101 is maybe.
I don't think there was the one word and the first point you just made that you didn't use, but I felt like it's what you were saying was having an impact. Like actually, did we have an impact in our time here?
Yes. Yep.
And I think I'm not interested in knowing how many employees you have. But I would tell you that every one of your employees or team members you've had an impact on as an owner, and their families and the ones that have been there for a long time, possibly maybe their grandchildren. So the impact is you've had a pretty wide reach, and you do what you do is important to the people. We can't meet every person in the world, right? So, but there's the people that we meet that are in our lives, and those are the people that we can impact. And so you've had an impact on the people in your life, and so that's really valuable. I mean,
and I think that's the ultimate measurement. It's not how many dollars you have in the bank or how many titles you have behind your name and I think ultimately what is that impact and what is that impact done. And that's why I think it's so important. I've had the privilege to be involved with educational with trade associations that have mentoring programs and continuing education and involved with kind of next generation, and so that impact on what comes next. That's the place where you're investing far beyond when you're going to have the chance to reap the rewards, but you're investing. It's like planting a tree. You don't enjoy the shade, but 2 generations, you really have to plant trees your whole career so that somebody will enjoy the shade.
Maybe you've gone through periods of your life where you maybe got nicer cars, nicer houses, like all the material things, but I'm sure you've gone through that. But those things, maybe you would agree, they wear off. They don't. They feel good for a moment, and they're sort of meaningless in the bigger picture. But I mean, I can speak from my experience when I know that I've made an impact on somebody. In fact, I have a guy in a room next to me who's in his mid-20s who we just hired, no experience at all. I see something in him that I believe he can be amazing, and he's chosen right now this business to work in, and I'm mentoring him and I'm coaching him, and there's days where I'm really hard on him and there's days where I'm not, and I'm pushing him to see where his limits are. I believe that I'll look back over time and see that I impacted this guy's life. And he has a little 2-year-old son, and I believe that with the time I'm putting into him, it does one thing for me. I feel good because I'm impacting somebody in a positive way, which feels way better than buying a nice car or a nice house.
Yeah, those things are enjoyable, but they're not necessarily satisfying.
Yeah.
And, it's ultimately that success is about having a satisfaction and making a difference.
100%. That is a fantastic place to end the show. That's a perfect note right there.
Great. No, this is a very enjoyable, and I much enjoyed our pre-time together as well.
Thank you. I really did too. One thing about you, and it's one of the reasons we do the show, is to get across to the viewer, whoever they may be, that it really is hard work and perseverance and a good attitude and all the things that we talked about, that you talked about. But being humble is something I picked up while I was talking to you, and it's a consistent characteristic of everybody, almost everybody that's been on the show. And I like to end the show by pointing that out, that it's important to be humble. You do need to hustle, and you do have to do the work. Like, nobody's gonna hand it to you, but you also can't be an ass either. Like, you got to be a good person.
Right.
It's true. I'm always glad at the end of a conversation when I can say that, and the person that I had on is that, and not an ass, but you're humble. You've clearly hustled, and you've clearly done a lot of work. So that's my message at the end of this episode, and I hope everybody that watches it feels that after watching it. So thank you so much for doing this. I had a great time.
No, my pleasure. And I'll send you a book, so take a look.
Thank you.
There may be actually some great people to think about interviewing out of that as well. Maybe give your next 100, maybe.
I appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to share at the end, as far as if you want people to reach you, or where they can find the book, or any information about yourself or your company?
Yeah, I think if you want to tell a story and you want to find a way to tell the story, we're not the person that makes the story. We're the person that helps tell the story. And I think I think where people are often challenged is they have it's in their head, and it's not necessarily, they have to get it out of their head, and they have to find a way, whether it's words or experiences or sort of what's the journey. And I think we are, and we've done this for watching the person with the first effort, where they mortgaged their house, and then they took the company public, and then they did something else, because when they took the company public, they had money to change other people's lives in other ways. Is that that's the journey we love to be on with people, is helping them find their voice, and then that voice finding them success, and then taking that success and doing something important with the success. So if anybody wants to be on that journey, we love to be on journeys like that with people.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do down below in the description is we're going to have whatever contact information you've given us that you want us to put out there, that's down below.
Okay.
I'm sure website, and I'm sure phone numbers and emails.
Yep.
We're going to, if you don't mind, we'll put a link to your book. It's on Amazon?
Oh, yeah, it's on Amazon.
We'll put a link to your book on Amazon.
Yeah.
And this will be out there forever.
Yeah.
Awesome time. Listen, this is great. I really appreciate it. Thank you again.
No, thank you. It's been a great pleasure. Say hello to Carol, if you talk to Carol, and Lonnie, and they're great people.
The whole family. Yeah, for sure.